Hi, and welcome to the pdfHTML webinar presented by iText employees Benoît Laga and Samuel Heilebroek. We'll do this technical presentation about our new product pdfHTML for some clarity for some extra information that you might find interesting. Some brief introductions. iText 7, iText software's newest flagship product, was released in May 2016. There was a re-implementation from scratch. It was mostly done for speed, but and for elegance and scalability, so that the new product is a lot more modular and extensible. And one of the biggest reasons we did that was, to be able to make more modules, to make add-ons to the product. One of these, the biggest or the add-on that will probably be used a lot, as it was in iText 5, will be pdfHTML. pdfHTML is a successor to iText 5's XML Worker product, and of course it's part of the add-on suite. It's one of the multiple add-ons that we have available now. As I said already, so iText 7 in general is a complete rewrite from scratch, of course retaining a lot of the functionality, but with a revamped API, with a lot of differences to make it more usable, to make it more sensible for users to utilize iText as fast as possible and as easily as possible. One of the big problems with iText 5's layout engine was that it wasn't compatible with some of the concepts in HTML and CSS. So iText 5 was designed to be text line based and top to bottom, like a structure tree and top to bottom. And there's a number of problems with that in the HTML specification and the way HTML is structured and logic works. So when we redesigned the layout engine for iText 7, we just took HTML as a model. So HTML elements are directly the basis for most iText's layout building blocks. Same thing for CSS. So the iText properties and styles are directly modeled or closely similar to a lot of CSS attributes. And of course, the concept of cascading, which is very important in CSS, has been improved a lot, because in iText 5 there was it was hard to do attribute inheritance in iText 5, so that was totally re-implemented. The comparison of pdfHTML to XML Worker, so iText 5's product, is that XML Worker was very ad hoc. It was just built according to questions that users had, and there were a lot of hacks that were in the product just to make something work for some customers, which of course is not very scalable, and it made it really hard to implement new features. So when we redesigned the product as a pdfHTML, there's of course all of these changes, all of these drawbacks were eliminated, or we tried to eliminate them. And we added a lot of new things. For example, handling of styles. There is a style object in pdfHTML and in iText 7 itself that makes it easier to generalize styles for multiple types of objects. We also support multiple, well, not all of them, but multiple CSS3 attributes and media queries. So if you have a different viewport for screen or for print, you can select that, that what you exactly want to show, or which CSS attributes you want to utilize. Also, a big problem in XML Worker was proper nesting of divs and tables, and that has we're confident it's been resolved. And imperfect inputs, so if it's not perfectly XHTML, then it's also a lot easier for users to just input that and get something reasonable back, like you would in a browser. There's also an extension mechanism for custom HTML elements or custom use of the standard HTML elements. And the same thing with CSS attributes. We'll go into this in the second half of the presentation. A thing that has not changed is that pdfHTML still requires static input documents, so we do not support JavaScript and dynamic loading of content, and most click events are not supported because we don't base our product on a product like WebKit. It's just our own implementation. It's more structurally sound and less focused on the visual rendering than on the structural rendering. Sorry. There's just one basic use case. We convert HTML content to PDF, of course, with embedded CSS or attached CSS. There's a few reasons why you would consider, well, is this a useful product? So why wouldn't you generate your PDF from a browser? One of the things that can be very handy in HTML is the structure tree that you have. And if you create in a browser the HTML, if you create a PDF file from an HTML file in a browser, you will definitely lose all that structural content. And in pdfHTML, it is a lot easier to create a PDF that does actually contain some metadata. So it's tagged PDF. That's a general concept. It's also easier for the substandards PDFA and PDFUA, which require tagging of PDF objects, or at least layout entities. Of course, if you don't do visual rendering, then you don't have the overhead of the visual rendering, so it's a headless process, and then performance can be made higher, can be kept higher. Of course, you don't need any external products then. For example, a browser like Mozilla or Chrome also requires a lot of resources from your server. So if you don't have that, then of course it's a lot of overhead that you don't have. And visual rendering can cause some challenges that pdfHTML then avoids with that. A number of specific changes from XML Worker include a number of HTML tags that we did not support in iText 5 and in XML Worker, such as the abbreviation tag. There's a lot more to come, but those are still in the works. Floating elements, and then media queries, and of course borders. It is more easily extensible for custom tags, as I said already. In XML Worker, it was also possible, but you had to jump through a lot of hoops to actually get something to work and to work beautifully. That was the biggest challenge. There's a number of things that weren't possible in XML Worker and that are now possible in pdfHTML with regards to integration with other functionality of iText. That's, of course, PDF Calligraph. So PDF Calligraph is a module for iText 7 that can easily and correctly render Arabic content, or for example, Hindi content, any Indic scripts. They're a lot more complex than the Latin script. Also, other functionalities such as PDFA and the barcode functionality in iText are very easy to leverage in pdfHTML. Another change is that XHTML is not required in pdfHTML. It was required in XML Worker, and because of course there's a number of restrictions on XHTML that are not required in HTML, that makes it a lot easier to create some inputs. Some further information about the roadmap first, and then some licensing information. So what we're now currently investigating, and we hope to release this in the next release, form tags, so form and inputs fields and checkboxes and buttons, etc. They are possible it's possible to render these in in PDF, but it requires some changes in iText 7. That's still, that we're still doing right now. So in our next release, we hope to be able to do this as just HTML in, PDF out. Now you would have to still jump through some hoops. Other so selectors in CSS are also now currently unsupported, but in our next version, most of them should be available, especially the nth child selector. So you can say every even numbered child, or every odd numbered child portrays a number of behaviors defined in CSS. That would be possible in an upcoming release. We will also be releasing the source code normally in our next version, because currently the source code has not been released yet, and pdfHTML requires a license key. There are trial licenses available, but they're only for 1 month, and of course you would be expected to have a sales conversation afterwards. Existing paying customers for XML Worker and iText 5 in general can migrate for free, so there wouldn't be a lot of obstacles to migrating to iText 7 and pdfHTML. And as I said already, so the next release, release 101, should be AGPL licensed. After we do some cleanup, we provide some better documentation in the API docs and tutorials, and of course we would have to remove the license checks that are now required.
So let's move on to the more technical part of the presentation. We'll start with showing the usual usage of the pdfHTML, talking a bit about the architecture and the steps it takes to transform your HTML into a PDF document. Then we'll move on to talking a bit about the possible configuration options for pdfHTML, and we'll finish with an example of customization. We'll introduce a self-defined QR code tag that leverages iText 7's barcode functionality to create actual QR codes in your PDF. So let's start with the basic usage. pdfHTML is actually pretty simple to make use of yourself. You just have to specify your inputs, specify your outputs, optionally specify some additional configuration, and then ask convert to PDF. And in goes your HTML and out comes your PDF. For input and output, you have a diverse set of options. You can just put in as a string the path to your HTML file. You can put in an input stream. You can put in a file object in Java, as well as because the mapping between HTML and iText layout objects was one that was quite natural, because the layout objects are mostly based on HTML. You can just ask pdfHTML to give back a list of iText elements, which you can then use to write your own logic around and to input them in the document in the order you wish. You can also just pass nothing but pass an output stream, so it just writes straight to the file. So that's how you usually will use pdfHTML if all you want to do is output basic PDF documents from your HTML without having to rely on some configuration. But you might ask, how does this work under the hood? Well, as said before, pdfHTML relies on the iText 7 layout module, which has a lot of similarities with the HTML IDs of block objects. Internally, we parse the HTML file and then translate the HTML tags into the corresponding iText layout objects. And then we also parse the CSS properties and we map them on the iText layout properties. This all happens in a 3-step process, for which the first step is, of course, to parse the HTML file. You can see on the right you have a small diagram that shows the inputs and an abstraction of how the internals of the HTML processor of pdfHTML work. So in a first step, we resolve resource locations and we parse our HTML file into a DOM model. We also do some minor correction for DOM errors and create a hierarchical file. In our second step, we translate this DOM to iText layout objects. This is done through the use of tag workers. Tag workers correspond to a certain tag, and they take that tag and they take all the info in the tag and they process it and output a iText layout object. This is done in a last in, first out manner, so the hierarchical HTML file will be traversed depth first, and in this way we can handle deeply nested HTML elements. We also resolve our CSS to apply to all the tags and set the correct properties on the corresponding iText objects. In our final step, in this case, we write it to a PDF document, and the PDF document we then write to a file on the system. So you have all the iText layout objects, then you can either decide I just want it to output to the PDF, and then they get added in the logical order of the HTML file, or at this point you can also just retrieve the list of iText layout objects and perform the addition to the master document yourself. This is broadly the way pdfHTML will function. So you might want to do some additional configuration. For example, you have some special fonts you want to use that are not in the basic iText core, or you have some images that need to be resolved in your CSS. There's two basic things for configuration. You can specify the base uniform resource.
Yes, base URI.
Identifier, right?
Identifier.
Yes. I sometimes get them mixed up. As well as assign fonts to font provider. So the URI is just simply saying all of my external resources that are not in the HTML file, like images, like extra CSS, is there. So it doesn't have to be in the same file as your HTML file if you don't want it that way. Then font provider is if you want to use non-standard fonts, you can use, you have to specify it in the configuration properties, and we allow for easy adaptation, so registering a custom font is quite easy to do. As you can see here, everything's stored in the converter properties, and it's as simple as calling a few set methods. Right, let's go on to something maybe a bit more interesting. Say you want to have QR codes in your PDF, but HTML doesn't have a QR code tag. But that's no problem, since you can just define your own QR code tag and then use iText barcode implementations that are located in barcodes to output pretty QR codes with correct encoding and such. This is an example of how you can define your own tags, and also in addition to defining new tags, you can also maybe you want certain CSS to be handled differently from the default implementation. We've provided mechanisms for this to also easily do this. I think the example on the slide is if say you want this to simulate a certain kind of color blindness. So you actually have to transform the color values that are stored in the CSS before they are applied. And you can do this using our custom CSS appliers through the iCSS applier interface. So for a concrete example, we'll return to the QR codes. I've defined the custom tag as just QR, and you can see the accompanying HTML on the screen right now. And then leveraging, so if we just use all the default values, this is the output in a PDF you're getting. It's simply the text, but we've defined our own QR code tag worker. We have registered it with pdfHTML, and now the outputs will look something like this. Not shown in the code later, but they have also been assigned the same CSS appliers as we use for image handling. So the red border around it and the slightly scaled up version is due to definitions in the CSS file of the HTML file. This is the code required to register the QR code tag worker with pdfHTML. You have to define your own tag worker factory, but it's mostly you need to override the get custom tag worker method and make sure that if it encounters a tag called QR code, it returns your own custom QR code tag worker. And this is the entire code for the QR code tag worker. It wasn't that much work in hindsight, but it might be a bit too much to show here.
Yeah, so this leverages the barcode functionality in iText 7 itself. So there's not a lot of code that you have to do on your license. So yeah, as you can see, yeah. So in the middle of the screen is barcode, QR code. This is an iText 7 object in the barcode module, and you just pass a few arguments to it, and then once you at the
very end, the barcode is transformed into an image, and this image is inserted into the PDF.
Yeah. So this example will also be put online if it isn't already.
I think it's online right now.
Yeah. So it's already online. So if you want, if you want to start use this as a start of a code, then of course you're welcome to. It is also possible not to just implement a tag worker. Or the interface iTag worker. It's also possible just to extend paragraph tag worker or image tag worker or
overrides.
And override.
It's the same mechanism as implementing your own custom tags. The difference is in your custom tag worker factory, you'll have to specify that if it encounters a paragraph tag, it returns the tag worker.
Yeah.
Internally, we first check if there is a custom tag worker available, and if it's not, we fall back on our default definitions. But if there is, we prefer to use the custom one.
Yeah. So actually, if we go back to the previous slide, so you can see custom paragraph tag worker. In the code behind, of course, it extends just the normal paragraph tag worker. And if for all other tags, you can actually choose whether you do return super.get tag worker, so that just executes the normal content, or you can just return null, and then the same thing will happen. So so the basic configuration will always take place unless you override this, and that's then you will have to specify the tag worker factory in your converter properties, and once you do that, it's 100%. Oh yeah, this is a CSS supplier factory. But anyway,
no, this is the tag worker factory, but my latest revision didn't go through.
Okay, yeah, so
I made some changes here.
Yeah, there's no big problem there. So that's basically it for the day.
Gist of it, yes.
Yes, so a few pointers that we would like you to remember from this is that pdfHTML is supposed to be very, very dynamic and customizable, and of course, if you don't have a very hard use case, let's say, it can be really simple, just 1 or 2 lines of code, and you can go from 0 to hero in 1 line of code.
So, any questions?
Yeah, this concludes the normal presentations. I'll unmute you guys so you can start asking questions if you have any. And so you should be. Oh, okay.
Patrick has muted himself. We can't change that. So, any questions?
Okay, no question.
Excuse me? Sorry, we couldn't really understand what you were saying.
I'm good. It seems to be the same thing, almost the same API as iText 5, I see.
Yes, that's part of the...
No big change, like there's still a factory and the tag worker and everything, so...
Well, that's...
What the changes?
Sorry, Patrick. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Me or you?
Yes. Yeah, we can't really hear you. Maybe it's best if you say what you want to say in chat, or because it's quite hard to understand you.
Okay.
First, at least. Sorry.
You